Alright guys, welcome back. In the last one we talked about forms, and in the previous one we talked about simpler form elements, and we also talked about all the different kinds of form widgets that we can use. And today we're just going to quickly go and make a simple form that'll look like this. So we have a full name, email, subject, your message, and submit button. So let's go ahead and do that. We're also going to apply some CSS at the end to see what it looks like. So this is not a crash course in CSS. It's just simply so you can understand what you'll be ending up with, right? So let's start with this. So first of all, I'll start with, that's CSS. Come back here now. And so we start off with doc type HTML. HTML language is equal to English. We're setting the meta character set is equal to UTF-8. If you remember, or we studied all this when we discussed the head tag. Title of the document we'll say contact form. And then inside the head, we'll start creating our form. So as you remember, the body of an HTML document has a main, and then it has a sections and then divisions. So we're going to set everything inside the main, and then we're going to create the form. First of all, we have a form element. If we save this right now, you'll see that nothing is there. That's okay. We're going to create the form to start off with. So let's start off with an H1 that says then if you remember, okay, so here we have a label that says full name, and then we have two inputs. So let's do that. Separate this out, and we'll set up a label first, and we'll call this label full name, and then on the next line we'll say we'll put up two inputs. So we'll say input, the type is equal to text. All right, and we have another input. We have one more input. Input type is equal to text. Save this. See what we end up with. Yeah, so we have a contact form, full name, and as you can see, these are inline elements, meaning they all go on the same line. They don't exactly move to the next line. Then we have an email. What we'll do is set up another label and say this is email, and set up an input type is equal to email. Save that. You see that we have the email thing. For now, what we'll do is let's move this on to the next line. We can remove these break line characters later when we do CSS. After this, we have another label that says subject, right? And this is a drop-down list, right? This is a drop-down list, so we'll be using the select tags. So we say select, and inside the select tags we'll provide some options. So we'll provide our own options, it doesn't matter. So we'll say option, we'll say okay, so do you have a software problem, or do you have a hardware problem? Do you have something related to warranty? We'll add another one. Say option. This will be other. We save this, and you should see, okay, so we have subject and our drop down menu with all these in it. Let's bring our drop down menu to the next line for now. Alright, there we go. And we have a text area. So we say text area, and I set that. You can see a text area. Okay, put a label for the text area. We'll call this message. Save that. So we have message and this one. And finally, we have a button that says submit. So let's do that. So let's create a button, and we'll say button, and we'll say type submit, and there we go. So now this is a very showy looking form. So I'll show you what this form looks like when we actually apply CSS, and this is a good precursor for you before we move into CSS to see the capability of CSS and how it can make just textual looking stuff into an actual proper colorful designed layout. So let's move into styles now, our style CSS. Well, you don't have to know the details about how CSS works properly for now. Just try and understand what we're trying to do, and I'll try to walk you through it as quickly as possible to make it simple for you. Okay, so a couple of things we're going to do. I want to use a font called Montserrat by Google. So I'm going to Google that, Google spelling of that, Montserrat font. So long. Okay, Montserrat. If you remember the lesson in which we were talking about how to import forms and fonts and add links, this is drawing from that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this link. So this is the Montserrat family selected. So I'm going to copy this link and paste it into our HTML. So then now our HTML is going to pull in this font into our web page, and then we're going to say let's apply this font to everything in our HTML document. That means everything inside the body. So I'm going to say font family, and I'm going to say Montserrat. We'll say the size of the main page will have a max width of 900 pixels. Or we'll just say width is 900 pixels. So when I do that, and I'll set the margin to auto, setting the margin to auto will set both the left side and the right side of the margin to be equal. Right, we haven't set up the style sheet, I'm sorry. So we say link style sheet is equal to styles.css. So if you remember, our style sheet is in the styles folder, styles folder, and it's styles.css. So we're going to say from the root folder, go inside the styles folder, and then check out styles.css. Now when I save this, they should all change. First, what we want to do is we want to set the size of the form. If you remember this, you'll see that now you can see why this is off to the side, because we set the main is going to be 900 pixels, so it must be spanning from here to here, and we set the margin to auto, so it's leaving some space on the side, so it looks like it's being centered. But what we're going to do now after this is we're going to create a form, right? Or we're going to target the form element, and we're going to say the form is going to have a width of 600 pixels. Okay, and we'll set the margin of the form to auto, which means it's going to center the form. You know what? Let's add a border over here so you can see what I'm dealing with. And we'll set this to, let's say gray. Okay, so there you go. This is what that looks like. So as you can see, we have a form in the middle of the page, right? Now we want the form to look a little nice, so we're going to add some padding. So let's add a padding of 50 pixels. There you go. So this makes the form look a little nicer. Put some space in between the border and the actual form, right? Let's make the borders of this a little curved. So what we're going to do is we'll say border radius 5 pixels, and this should curve the corners, right? That's cool. Now let's target the H1. Okay, first of all, what we're going to do with let's target all the labels and say that the labels are going to take an entire line. So when it does that, you're gonna have to move all the inputs to the next line, right? So let's do that. Let's say label, and we'll say display block. There we go. So now all the labels take an entire line. That's what the display block does. Then we'll say we'll make all the labels have a font weight of bold. Font weight bold. There you go, that looks better. Let's put some gap between between the labels. Let's say put some gap between the labels, so we'll say margin top, we'll say about 12 pixels. There you go. Now there's some gap between each label. Let's put some gap between the label and the input, and we'll do that in, let's change the color of the text. Color of all the labels, we'll keep it hashtag, this is a hexadecimal value, so I'm just gonna make it give it a light gray color. Now let's target the inputs, right? So these are all these text fields, the inputs. What we're gonna do with the input is, first of all, I'm gonna set a padding for it, because right now if you see, it's very close. Anything you type is too close to the borders of the input. Let's put some gap in between that, and that's what padding is. So we'll say padding 10 pixels, and there we go. This looks a lot nicer, right? So that's padding 10 pixels. Let's set the width of all these input methods to span the entire length of the form. So we'll say width will be 100%. There we go, that's better. Okay, but we missed out. Okay, we missed out the select and the text area, so we can let's put the same thing for this one as well. So let's say input, select, and text area all have padding of 10 pixels width and 100%. There we go. So this looks better. Bring this in a little bit so you can see clearly. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Let's add some margin between the label and the input, because it's too close to each other. So let's say margin top, say 8 pixels. There you go, that looks better. And let's set this, let's curve the borders of these inputs. So we'll say border radius will be 3 pixels. There you go, it's slightly curved. Great. Also, you can see this, it's a little too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say border, change the border a bit. I'm going to say 1 pixel solid, and I'm going to use the same color, light gray. We want this full name to be on the same line. So we'll individually target just that one. And we'll say, okay, target the input of type text. Okay, so when I say target the input of type text, it's going to target only these two, because this one is email, this is a select element, and this is a text area element. So the only input with type text are these two. So it's going to target these two, and we'll set, let's set the width to 250 pixels, because we have the form which is 600 pixels. This entire form is 600 pixels, and we have the padding which is 50 pixels over here. So that's 600 minus 50 minus 50, and that should be 500. So if I set these, so this entire length is 500. If I split that up into 250, then we should be having 250 input squares on one line. Let's see that. Yeah, there we go. So that's 250. Box sizing. Same border box. Oops, let's just save a lot of problem. Yeah, there we go. This is a lot better. Why this is used is a little beyond you right now. Simply just know that when you set a border for elements, it adds some width to the actual width of the element. But when you use border box, what it does is it creates the border within the actual width of an element. So let me say 250 pixels, let's say 240. Okay, because it's leaving some gap in between, we can't say 250. So we can say 245, just to make it closer. Okay, 246. Yeah, a little closer. 247. Okay, at 247, that's too much, so let's just say 246. There we go. So this looks nice. 240 pixels. Alright. Then we have software. Alright, this is fine. We have the message. That's fine. Let's customize the button. Let's say button, and we'll say background. Let's set the background color to some blue color. See if this color picker is working. And this color picker, the net is slow today. Oh, there we go. Okay, so blue. Alright, so let's just okay, let's just take this color. This is a nice color. Control C, and I'll say background color. Paste that in here. Save that. And you can see the contact. Yeah, there we go. That's a nice color. And what we'll do is we'll set the width Actually, let's set that here too. Let's set the button width to be 100%, and we'll say padding will be 10 pixels. We'll say the color of the text will be white. We'll say the font size. Let's set the font size for everything over here. So let's say the label. Set the font size of the button. So we'll say font size. We'll try 14 pixels. Not that great. Increase that. 18. Okay, that's good. And finally, let's set the font weight to bold. There we go, that looks a lot nicer. And you know what, let's add a checkbox over here saying before you submit the form, you're gonna have to agree to some our terms and policies. Let's jump back into, oh wait, we don't need this anymore. We don't need the break line because we set that up in CSS using the display block style, right? Let's add a checkbox after this that says input is checkbox, save, and we'll add a label that says you agree to our terms and policies. As you can see, this goes to the next line. That's because we've set the labels to display block, meaning this is going to the next line, but we want both of these to be on the same line. So let's do that. So we just want to target this label. Let's give this label an ID or something. Let's call it we'll call it terms, let's say. Okay, terms. And we'll specifically target just this label, and we'll say hashtag. This is how we target IDs in CSS. And we say display inline. Okay, and we'll say font size. Let's reduce the font size for this. Font size 14 pixels. And we'll also say the checkbox. Input of type is equal to checkbox, and we'll say that one will have a width. Right now the width of the checkbox is the full length, but we just want to make it the actual size of the checkbox. So we'll say width is auto. So when we do that, you can see that everything comes out on one line. Great. Now another thing, we'll say 8 pixels. Let's put a gap between all of these. So instead of just saying input margin top, what I'll do is I'll just set the margin for top and bottom. There we go, that looks better. Okay. So we have a submit button. Let's remove the border from the submit button. You can see a light gray border over there. I don't want that. So I'll say border none. Yes, that looks better. But we'll keep a small radius over here to make it look nice. And we'll say that's border radius 3 pixels. There we go, that looks nicer. Finally, getting back to forms, let's add a placeholder over here. Inside input type text, we'll say placeholder is equal to first name. So we'll just say first. And for the second one, we'll say placeholder is equal to second. Sorry, not second, last, my mistake. So that's first and last. Okay, that's spelling mistake. Place, there we go. First and last. And great. So now we can type something in here, and submit. Oh, but you see, okay, so the form submitted, but the problem is the the person didn't, I didn't enter the email, but we want that to be required. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the email input type is required, right? So if I type a name now and submit, you'll see that it says please fill out this field, the email. So let's say I type something, and you can see please include an @ in the email address, so that's automatically verifying that the email address is also correct. So let's add that to the name input field as well. So let's say that is required. Even the first name and last name both are required. Move this in a little bit. Go. Yeah, so both of these are required, and we'll say even the message is required. Text area, even the text area will be required. So we're saying the person cannot submit the form without filling in the full name, email, and the message. Okay, we save this and submit. There you go. But let's say that the person has to have this "you agree to our terms." This is also required. So we'll say the checkbox is required. Okay, so let's say we have something in here. We have then an email at, let's say, gmail.com. Then we have some message, and if we try to submit, it says please check this box if you want to proceed. Now we can also check this box by default. So we'll say required, and we'll say by default it'll be checked, right? So Control C, you can see that when the form loads, this checkbox is checked by default, right? What else can we do? Okay, so these fields are required, but there's no indication of it being required. So we can add a star to it, which means if there's a star, it means that this field is absolutely required, right? So we'll add a star to each of those labels. We'll add a star to our checkbox label as well, right? So there we go. So these have stars on them. So this tells the user that, look, if you want to submit this contact form, these are the important fields and you have to fill them. Let's do something different actually. I'm going to replace all these stars with a span tag, okay, with a span, and I'll put a star inside it, right? And then I'll say, I'll give this a class. Class is equal to required, right? And then I'll come in here and I'll say anything with the class, anything with the class of required should have a color of red. So let's save this. There we go. So this is a nice form we have. It's cool. So this is how we create a. Take care.